First of all, thank you all so much for coming. Like, I know we're competing with an amazing day outside and like the thick of, gearing up for the season here on the island. So we're really grateful that all of you took the time to be here. And I loved hearing all the introductions. My quick introduction of me is, so as Karen mentioned, I've been writing a column for The Globe for a long time, covering the startup ecosystem and the venture capital innovation ecosystem, both in Boston and throughout New England. I've been down here to Nantucket to report some stories in the past, and up to Burlington, Vermont, and the, Portland, Maine, and all over the region. So I still write that column once a week, but I also have sort of an entrepreneurial background, which is helping start the Nantucket conference in 1999 with Ralph and some others. That's a small women-owned business based in Boston, but we've been doing the Nantucket conference here and another conference on Cape Cod called the Convergence Forum for Biotech. So I have both the journalist hat, the entrepreneur hat. I also have a startup in Boston called Innovation Leader that's a media and conference company focused on innovation in big companies, and have had the experience of bootstrapping that for the last 4 or 5 years, with no outside funding, and we're up to about 10 employees. I put together this panel just because these are all amazing people that I think there's a lot to learn from. My plan for the panel part of this is just to tell some entrepreneurial war stories. I mean, I don't think we can give you enough advice in an hour to really help you get from the $0 revenue stage to $100 million revenue stage. We want to be realistic and have good goals for an hour. We want to sort of share some war stories, a little bit of advice. We want to take questions from you. And then after we're done with this, we'll kind of break out into some small group sessions on different topics where it may be 3 people in a group, it may be 5 people or 10 people in a group, whatever the number is, that's okay. It may be a one-on-one consult if there's only one person in that group. And the goal of this whole event is really to be helpful to you. And so raise your hand at any point if you want to take things in a different direction or ask a question. Let's see if we can do a lightning round of intros of the panelists, kind of basically the same length as they did their intros. And Scott, why don't you start?
Cool, awesome. Thanks, Scott. And it's fun to have 3 Scotts on the panel, so really excited about that.
You can say, I have a question for the panelists who are not named Scott to answer.
Yeah, so I'm Scott Miller, and I'm a mechanical engineer by training. Always loved robots. Had a chance to spend 10 years at iRobot leading the team that built the first 4 million Roombas back in the really early days. So got to go through this whole journey firsthand. And after 10 great years there, I saw that more and more companies were able to take an idea and get to a prototype through 3D printing or Arduino or whatever. And then they were thinking about, how do I go from one to many? But they didn't really know how to do it. And that's something that I had lived firsthand and made so many mistakes, which I can tell you about in a second. So that was kind of the impetus of us starting Dragon Innovation, where we really work with companies that can plunk on the table a working prototype, and then we'll help them scale from maybe 1,000 to 1 million. And for a Nantucket company, one of the ones we worked with really closely was Ring. I don't know if you guys know Jamie, but he had a pretty good entrepreneurial story. Ring or Dropcam or Fitbit or Sphero or Bose or companies like that. And in our journey, we started as a consulting shop, raised some money from Amazon, and then sold about 1.5 years ago to a big company. So I've been able to see kind of the different progressions there. And then in parallel with this, I started a small VC fund focused on hardware called Bolt, where we have, I think, 112 million under management, trying to make investments in early stage companies. So if you have a hardware idea, we'd love to chat with you more about that.
Hi, I'm Liz Hitchcock. I just wanted to say I love the diversity of the group here because it kind of talks to my background. I was in tourism on Cape Cod. I went to Cape Cod Community College, and it was a great experience. After that, I went to WPI and I got a degree in computer science. I did web design for a long time for many different companies. During that time, I worked for Luke back there, Max Wood. I also started an iPod jewelry company. I owned a nanny business. And then I decided that why not? I'll help my husband run his company too. So I helped him grow Dine. I was the first sales and marketing person for the enterprise product. I won customers like WB and Twitter. And when we decided we both couldn't be doing that full time if we wanted to have a family, I retired and had 3 children. They're 9, 7, and 6 now, and since then I've gone back into entrepreneurship. I've started a small fund for New Hampshire entrepreneurs in New Hampshire. I've opened up a bookstore, and once again, I'm helping my husband start another tech startup.
Hi, Scott Savitz. I did a company. We were an internet retailer of footwear online. It was a kind of a neat sort of virtual, what the internet was supposed to be story. We grew very fast, went profitable very early. We ended up doing, I stepped away from it. We sold the company, but we were doing $200 million in sales with about 180 employees, including customer service and warehouse. So it was a good scalable story. And then I have a venture firm. We invest in a series of companies. I will say, though, that I am so ridiculously, I have a house on the island, too, so I'm hugely biased because I love Nantucket, but I am very struck by the audience. I think I've seen so many panels and so many of these things, and we'll have all these entrepreneurs, and even the exclusivity of the Nantucket conference. I would tell you there is so much higher caliber here. I don't want to make Scott feel bad, but there is, to hear everybody in this, first of all, in gender and age, but just doing, all these entrepreneurs. So I'd be very careful of our advice a little bit because, and I'm serious about that, because a lot of you guys are doing so much better than all the aspirational stories that are supposed to be so terrific. A lot of these companies don't make a dime in revenue. They raise way more money than they will ever create any value. They talk about doing all this stuff, but they don't, a lot of times, they go to a lot of conferences and they don't launch their businesses. To hear how many businesses you guys all have that are real, that I am sure have much better customer acquisition costs, much lower marketing as a percentage of revenues, that you are actually being sustainable, it's way better.
All right, that's enough reality check from you, Savitz. But so he sort of skipped over the fact his company was shoebuy.com, so kind of one of the original online retailers of footwear, acquired by Barry Diller's Interactive Corp in New York, and I guess recently sort of resold. It's now part of Jet.com and the Walmart empire, which I didn't realize. Forget the original acquisition price, but I saw the $70 million. I8 Interactive Corp sold it to Jet for $70 million. Yep. Not too bad. All right. Ralph, you're next.
Don't you love it when Scott tells everyone how much your business is sold for?
I bet the original sale price was higher, right?
It was.
Yeah.
Good morning, everybody. My name's Ralph Foles. I also love Nantucket. I've learned a new term today, a wash-ashore. Never heard this. I guess you would call me a wash-ashore wannabe, okay? I rode my bike down to Surfside Beach last night and did some fishing, and it's just nothing successfully, I must add. I'm a tech guy. I've started 2 big companies in my career. One I bootstrapped with no funding. It was called Molecular. In the first wave of the internet, we helped companies like Fidelity and Staples and others launch their first website. So we launched Fidelity's first website in 1994, and it had a college calculator. You could say how old your child was and how much you have saved, and it would compute what you had to save a month. That was bleeding edge at the time, okay? Bleeding edge, okay? And my most recent company, which is probably more applicable to this group, the last 7 or 8 years, I was the CEO of a company called WordStream, and our customers were small businesses, and we would help them advertise on Google, Facebook, Bing, people with small budgets, a couple $100 a month, $1,000 a month. But when you added up all those hundreds or thousands from all our small business customers, we managed almost $1 billion on Google a year. And we sold that business last year to Gannett, the big newspaper publisher.
So for $150 million, up to $150 million.
Thank you, Scott.
Yes.
Thank you, Scott.
These are business people. They care about numbers, right?
My name's Joe Caruso, and I think I'd like to point out the kind of things Scott alluded to about the caliber of entrepreneurship we're hearing about here. When people think of entrepreneurship, they often want to talk about what company did you start. And in my mind, entrepreneurship is a mindset. It doesn't really matter whether you're Jeff Bezos or you started. Now, It does. I know it's tongue-in-cheek. Money. People often look at money as the end objective. Actually, you know what? Never mind. You want just background, and I'm getting
Yeah, just
carried
introduction.
away.
Don't get too
So
philosophical on us.
introduction. First entrepreneurial experience when I was 8 years old. I bought a paper route from an older kid because he was making more money than I was shoveling sidewalks and mowing lawns. Never really started my own company, but have been involved in the entrepreneurial ecosystem my whole life, the beginning of which, one summer I worked for AT&T. When I got out of college, they offered me a job. I turned it down to work for a small company, and my mother almost had a heart attack because working for AT&T was like the goal in life. And I think for all of you who don't work for the AT&Ts of this world, in my mind, most entrepreneurs are unemployable. You do what you have to do, and you don't do what someone else tells you to do. And that doesn't mean, never mind.
All right, I'm taking over
You
your
turned
intro,
me
Joe.
on, I know.
So,
Shut up, we'll give it to you.
So I'm going to introduce Joe because I actually wrote a profile of Joe that you can find on the Boston Globe, which Joe is the most active and accessible angel investor in New England, possibly the whole East Coast. He's invested in companies like HubSpot, which is now publicly traded, Crashlytics, which was acquired by Twitter and led to Twitter having a Cambridge office, Regina Pizzeria, I didn't know you invested in those guys, Coffee Connection, which I love, the George Howell chain of cafes, which was acquired by Starbucks and basically became Starbucks' footprint originally in Boston. And other crazy things, like you invested in a flying car company called Terrafugia. So Joe is really an amazing angel investor, and almost every week he is somewhere in Boston meeting with entrepreneurs, anyone who wants to sign up for a slot, no matter what they're doing, if they're working on a perpetual motion machine or a, protein bar, Joe will meet with them and give them some advice.
Scott's my PR department.
Yeah, I aspire to that job. So thank you for being here, Joe. Bobby, go ahead.
I'm not going to start with my childhood. I'm a parallel entrepreneur. I run 3 companies. The day job is a marketing and PR firm. We deal almost exclusively with startups and small companies. The night job is Mass Innovation Nights. It's a monthly new product launch event. We've launched over 1,200 new products in the last 10 years that have gotten more than $3 billion in collective funding. It is all social media powered and community driven. So we are driving around 3 million views a month just through social media as a community activity. And then the dream job is Innovation Women. It's my own startup. It is a online self-service speakers bureau for entrepreneurial, technical, and professional women. So at conferences and events, our proportions here are probably pretty much dead on. 70% of all conference speakers over the last 5 years have been male, which basically keeps women out of thought leadership roles, away from customers, away from potential partners, board seats, and funding. So I'm looking to connect event managers with awesome speakers who just happen to be women.
Great. Could people in this audience sign up to participate in Innovation Women somehow?
Absolutely. Just come and find me. I'll hand you a card.
All right, great. So 2 things I want to plug before I ask kind of a next question, which is Mass Innovation Nights. Definitely sign up for the email list or follow them on social. It's definitely worth checking out. They're all around the greater Boston area. You haven't done one yet on Nantucket or Hyannis, but that probably should be in the future.
I'm happy to come back. Our next event is actually this coming week. We're in Lawrence at the Polar Tech, or the former Polar Tech factory.
Awesome. And the other thing which Joe has been involved with is every Thursday of the year in Kendall Square, there's this thing called Venture Cafe. So if you're ever off island and in the Boston area on a Thursday night, it's free beer, networking, meet with Joe, workshops, mini conferences. It's really amazing, an amazing way to plug into sort of the Boston-Cambridge ecosystem.
It's not just meet with me. There's probably 8 or 10 or 15 people there offering mentoring. So you just walk in and sign up and sit down.
Yeah, it's really incredible. So, okay, I don't want to go down the line with every question. I really just have 2 questions that I wanted to throw to these folks, and then I want to hear your questions. But Where I want to start is just like, tell us a story. I think everybody in this room probably has had those like moments when, the sort of dark night of the soul, the business just isn't going the way you want it to go. Someone quit, the company is running out of money. So tell us your story of like one of those moments where just like one of those low points of entrepreneurship, and maybe kind of what you learned from it, or maybe it was just a really trying moment. Ralph, you're smiling, so you should start.
Well, when Scott told me he was going to ask this question, I had to spend some time like picking amongst these moments so I tried to pick one that I think would apply to everybody. So my first company, I had this brilliant, we were growing. This is the internet services company. The web comes along. We're growing like crazy, and we needed space. We needed office space. We never had enough office space. So I had this brilliant idea. Let me take way more space than I need, and you know where this is going. I'll get some subtenants, and then I can kick them out, along the way and take the space I need. I thought it was brilliant. So it all worked. I signed up for this big lease. My board agreed. I went and got 3 subtenants. Now they were all .com companies. That's The
year is 2000, right?
The internet blows up, pets.com, the whole thing. And one by one, I lose every single subtenant goes out of business. And so I almost killed my first company on real estate, because the lesson learned is there is no getting out of a lease. Okay? Landlords take zero risk. You probably all have learned this in your business. Zero risk. And the only way I got out of it was my landlord was actually Harvard University, had bought the complex. And I went to them and I just said, look, I'm going to go out of business if I have to pay for all this space I have and don't need for year after year, And they were kind to me. They said, write us a check for 1 year of rent on any space you want to get rid of. And I wrote a giant check, and they let me out, and I lived. So the lesson learned, be very careful about your real estate decisions. They are not flexible.
Scott, Liz, Scott, you want to go next?
Yeah, I'll give you two quick ones. One from iRobot, one from Dragon. So at iRobot, we had some initial success with the Roomba, and it started to take off. And we actually were to the point where we couldn't build them fast enough to satisfy the demand, which we thought was normal. And we learned later in life that it just doesn't work that way forever. But we were introducing a new product and a new version of the Roomba, and decided to change the processor for no apparent reason. It just seemed like something we were going to do. And before you ship a product, it's usually good to test it. So we thought, well, maybe we should do that. So we started testing them, and we had this test bed, which was like a 4x8 sheet of plywood with a metal strip across separating carpet from hardwood. And lo and behold, all of the robots were like flies on flypaper, just stuck on that strip. And they were like dead, like not reboot, but the processor was just cooked. And this is like 3 weeks before shipping to hit the Christmas orders. So we were wondering what was going on. And we did a little more studying and realized that not only did they vacuum up dirt, they vacuumed up electrons. In fact, they vacuumed up 25,000 volts of electrons and stored them on the shell. So whenever they drove over this strip, there was a little bolt of lightning that would like travel for a foot through the robot, to find the processor and just totally toast it. And we were able to solve the problem once we found it. But it's one of those where things were going so well, and we decided to fix something that wasn't broken, and pretty much put the entire company at risk. Fortunately, we were able to recover from that. So yeah, be really careful with what you change. The more heartfelt one, I guess, is from Dragon. That one we were able to fix. But Dragon, we had a board meeting coming up, and things just weren't going as well as we had hoped. We were burning money at a pretty good clip, and tried to put together this financial plan to get our burn in order. And basically, if you look, like we'd always plot how much money do we have in the bank as a function of time, and eventually it's going to cross the x-axis, and that's when you're out of cash and you're dead. So we put a plan where the plane was just sort of skimming along the treetop for way too long. And I was really naive then, went in, got my ass handed to me by the VCs, like, yeah, that's never going to happen. which I went in not prepared for that conversation. I thought like, oh, they're going to be supportive. Let's do this. But they're like, no, you've got to get rid of half of your team. You've got to really control your burn. And I knew if I did that, the company would be like, we just couldn't recover from it. And I was also caught off guard, so I was definitely on my heels. But what we decided to do is everybody took massive pay cuts. I took a 70% pay cut. Most of my team took a 50% pay cut. But we didn't lay off anybody, even though that's what they wanted to do. And in return for the pay cut, I gave everybody stock. And they accepted that. And ultimately, we were acquired, and the stock was worth, A, we survived, and B, the stock was worth more than the lost revenue. But it's one of those where I think the lesson was, despite a lot of smart people telling you to do something, at times you've got to follow your gut. And it's an interesting dynamic between VCs and investors. In fact, at the Nantucket conference back maybe 4 years ago, it was Spark Capital and Runkeeper did this really interesting fireside chat of how do you balance the investor with the CEO, because as the CEO you need to have a clear vision and know what you want to do, but you also have to listen to advice, and they're often somewhat conflicted. But yeah, I think here, have the vision, have the conviction, and do what you think is right, even in the face of sometimes advice that's contrary to that.
There's one other quick iRobot story that I want to touch on that Colin Angle, the CEO, tells, which is they were trying to figure out what the name for the Roomba should be before they launched it. And so they basically asked all the employees, like, could you all submit names? It was like, well, we'll tap our smart employees. They'll come up with a great name. Can you tell them what the name was that employees came up with? Do you remember?
Well, we had a whole bunch of them. Like, one was Dust Bunny. We had all sorts of things around sucking.
Colin said that the one that got the most votes was Cyber Suck.
Yep.
And he was like, once Cyber Suck won, he was like, we need to hire a naming agency. Let's pay the professionals to come up with the product name.
Yep, thank God. And I think they paid $15,000 for the name, which seemed like so much money at the time, but it was money well spent.
Why don't we so we're not going down the line all the time. Joe or Bobby, do you want to share a story?
Mass Innovation Nights and Carlton PR Marketing are actually born out of 2008 when the market fell off a cliff and the startup I was working with at the time ran out of money. My husband stays home with our kids, and he's a musician, which is good that I work. We'd be living in a van. But it was November 2008. Like, literally, I'd been living on startup wages for 3 years. I had a non-employed husband, 2 kids that like to eat. And so all of a sudden it's like, oh God, and there were no jobs, 0 jobs. So that's when I decided that public relations, which was my profession up until that point, was probably not the thing I should focus on, and I should focus instead on social media. So I started Mass Innovation Nights really as a way to figure out social media and figure out, it's like, okay, is that a commentary? No. Figure out like how to use this toy to be a tool for business. And I started Innovation Nights, and like I did it all on my own. Like the first event, I paid $10 for a domain name. I bought like $12 worth of bottled water, and 200 people showed up. And I was like, oh God, all right, I got something here. And for the first like 6 or 7 months, I was rolling out tables. I was doing everything myself. And this guy showed up and he said, why are you not getting this thing sponsored? Why are you not making money? Why are you not charging for tickets? Why are you not charging the entrepreneurs anything? And I came from a PR background where everything is free, which is not true. So I'm like, yeah, that's not really my area. And it's driving new business for my PR and marketing firm. So I'm okay. And he's like, tell you what, I will make this thing make money, and you teach me about social media. I'm like, sure, I just learned it 6 months ago. I'm good. So he, within, I think, 4 months, had sold about a year's worth of sponsorship, created a sponsorship model for it, kind of got into my head and said, what you are doing is worth money, and you should be making a living off this. About 5 years ago, I hired an event manager because the untold secret of Innovation Nights is I hate running events. And I run more events than anybody else in the Boston startup community, I think. So hiring an event manager, and Innovation Nights now pays for an event manager and pays for a couple people to help that event manager. And so I think a lot of it was the dark area for me was kind of getting out of my own head and saying what I am doing is valuable and it can make money.
Awesome. Liz, why don't you go next?
Great. Mine goes back to the days when I was still a web developer, and my husband and I were at Apple World, and Steve Jobs had just done his final, and one more thing, and he pulled out the iPod Shuffle, which was this brand new, super small music device. And we ran over to the Apple store and we picked one up, and I'm a creative at heart. That's really what I love to do. And we were in Chinatown, and I picked up a bunch of beads and a bunch of wire, and I got going, and I started to create all of this jewelry that you could put over the shuffle in order to make it more pretty, because it's just this white like brick on your neck otherwise. And so I put it online, and it went kind of viral. And I wasn't expecting that, but I'd been doing social media for years, and I'd been doing websites for years, so I should have had a clue. And I got calls from tons of people. The Wall Street Journal had me in there. Forbes Magazine had me in there. I like to joke with my husband that I was the first Hitchcock in those publications. And then I started to get calls from writers. And they're like, well, what are you going to do with this? Are you going to send it to China and mass produce it? And it was a creative thing for me. It was something I was doing because I loved it, not because I wanted to mass produce it. And I had to take a step back and think about it. And I realized, no, I'm going to keep on doing this for creativity and for something that I love rather than to make a bunch of money. And that was really hard for me because I had this, I knew I could do it. I knew I could make it something big and huge, but I kept on doing it because I loved it. And I took all the attention I got from it, and I kept on doing web design.
Awesome. Joe, do you want to tell a story about one of the companies that you've invested in, or is this a personal story?
I can do it either way. I was originally thinking I didn't really have a story about a company I ran because I have not, unlike these people, haven't been the serial entrepreneur that started companies, much more in the business of helping companies. But there was a company I was running a number of years ago, and we went through a period of some pretty spectacular success in the early days. It was right in the early days of the PC, where we had doubled and doubled again. And I went and convinced IBM that they should be doing what we're doing, and I got a huge contract with them that tripled the size of the company, and we were really flying. And then IBM changed their mind. And as the company, on the way up, the numbers looked fantastic. On the way down, getting back to a number that was still triple what we had been was depressing. And my VCs got into a fight. They ended up suing each other, and the company ended up unraveling. And it basically, rather than the other stories which say how they turned something like that into something good, that's what made me commit to want to be a mentor to entrepreneurs. Because if I had had someone who was experienced, you're a young first-time CEO doing stuff, you don't know anything about the ground rules of venture or fund life or any of that stuff. And so that's now later in life, the last 20 years, I've been mentoring entrepreneurs because I am doing what I wish I had back when I was 30.
It's fantastic.
By the way, one thing I just hearing about Bobby saying she hates putting on events, that now explains something. Years ago, I had started a nonprofit called Boston Region Entrepreneurship Week, and I wanted her to run it for. She was the ideal person in Boston. I begged her. I took her to dinner at the Elephant House, and I remember in Waltham. No, Joe, I can't do it. I said, Bobby, you have to do it. And now I understand why. So I'm no longer insulted.
The good news is you're in good company because I've turned down many opportunities where I've run events.
All the truth is coming out here. So it's interesting. Joe's story kind of ties into a little bit of the story that you were telling at the conference yesterday with Mike Russell from Paint Zen, where he kind of, he told the story of like, we're raising a round of funding and we have this one investor who said, yes, I'm going to invest in your round. And then when it came time to write the check, didn't happen. And just that learning of like, hey, a deal may seem like a deal, but it's probably not a deal until it's on paper. But I'm curious if you're going to pick one of the companies you've invested in or a company that you were building to tell a story.
I mean,
about.
I think you said it best. It's which story do you want to tell? It's like a million. They're all every one of these companies, no matter how successful and no matter how straight line up, ends up being a journey. That's for sure. And I can tell you that the only person who was not going to be impacted by the journey when I did Shoe Buy was me. I bought this business plan book for dummies, and it had this first page, and it said, you will be stressed as an entrepreneur, you will be strained, you won't see your family as much, you'll be financially leveraged, I was like, that's not going to be an issue because one, I had made some money, thankfully. I was not going to leave my banking job, and I had put together a good team, and I had a bunch of NASDAQ stocks that were way up, and then fast forward like 1 year later, the NASDAQ was imploding. The business the paragraph also said you'll have to be all in, and of course, my team came to me and said, if you don't leave and come here and join full-time as CEO, we're all going to leave, so that was great. And we were going through the dot-com implosion where the internet supposedly didn't work. And I do remember actually even pulling over, I was going to see, I forget, the priest or the rabbi for my girlfriend, who I, of course, got her to quit her job and join Shoe Buy as one of the first few employees. And I had to tell her, I was like, I just want you to know, like, I'm not taking any salary. The stock market's doing terrible. I don't even know the capital markets window is closed right now, so it's not like we're going to be able to raise any money. I got you quit your job and you're here. And I was like, listen, I just want to make sure you would know all this before we go and decide we're going to get married, because you might not be marrying the person. She was like, well, it's kind of funny because I actually just made us reservations tonight to celebrate that we sold like 100 shoes that day or something. And she's like, I think we're doing great. So I was like, well, we'll might as well spend the last bit of money. We'll go out to dinner or something. But it is unbelievable. I always think about it. It never, it's the gods of entrepreneurialism. There's a huge pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, but there's no way you're not going to be truly tested. And in some ways, I don't know if you ever really get it back. And that's why I say, I went to venture because it is really hard. And that was a business that did end up being pretty much a straight line. But I still even look at it and say, it is amazing to me the commitment a lot of these entrepreneurs make, and even the entrepreneurs that actually have huge success and then end up deciding they're going to do it again, because I kind of think it's even, there's clearly a reason why I went on the other side of the table.
Let me see if we can do kind of a lightning round of a minute or less answer from each of you. On just what advice do you find yourself giving most often when you talk to founders? What is your sort of go-to fortune cookie for founders? Yeah, go ahead.
So I'm on a couple boards right now, and I see this repeating time after time. It's very simple. Focus. So I'm on a board, for example, in Philadelphia, and I'll go to the board meeting, and the entrepreneur's got so much energy. We're going to do this. Our product's doing this. We got initiative to do this. We're going to do big customers, small customers, medium customers. We're going to expand. And they all just try to do too much at one time. So I challenge them very simply. Tell me two things that you're going to do, and do them awesome and be deep and great. You can have 5 other things on your list, but have the discipline to just have them on the side until you nail those 1 or 2 big things.
Yeah.
So I heard that all the time in my startup.
Yeah.
Is everyone just says focus, but how do you help them figure out what to focus on? Because I think the hardest thing that I figure out in my startup and in life usually is we can all do 99 things probably really well if you choose to do any one of them, but you're
saying no to 98 things, right?
Yeah.
So how do you help them figure out what to focus on in that? Because it's all of them are opportunities. No one knows which one is really best.
All right. So how do you help them pick from the 99 things they might focus on?
That's very business specific. But if you and I were sitting down and we were talking about that, I'd say, okay, let's first of all, let's go through an exercise on a whiteboard and get them all up on the whiteboard. What are they? What are the things you're thinking about? And let's say there were 15 things, okay? Then I would say, all right, which ones are going to move the needle on this business? You know, and that's the part that's very business specific. Like maybe you need to generate cash because your investors told you no more is coming. Maybe someone else is all about getting the business stable. Maybe it's about growth. But we would come up with some criteria. You know, let's just say it was what's going to generate cash in the next 6 months. Then we go through and rank them all. You know, and get rid of some, and eventually we'd get down to the 2 that you should do.
All right, Liz, how about you? Because you have now this physical brick and mortar bookstore in Manchester, so I'm curious about your advice.
Sure. So I think it goes to both technology and to bookstores, is that you have to iterate quickly. You know, try something, maybe not too much focus because you want to remain curious. Try new things, but when you find out they're not working, keep on moving on. And know that, you know, it's fine to make a mistake. It's even better when you make a mistake and then you fix it.
Cool. So yeah, I think building on that, being an entrepreneur isn't all rainbows. You're going to get beat up a lot, and you may be faced with, you know, potentially taking a significantly lower or no salary or negative salary, as it turns out, or laying off people, your friends that you've worked with. So the trick is just going in eyes open, knowing it's going to be a hard journey. And I think the thing that gets at least me through it is having a great team around me and having conviction that what you're doing is important, and that will help you keep the longer view and not get all wrapped around the axle when things go sideways in the short term.
Scott?
I think you got to, first of all, you really want to be authentic, so you really should be doing something that you really believe you're solving a problem for, not I'm trying to go make money. Your value proposition needs to be very real, in which you're going to hopefully understand based on the third thing, which is you really need to listen to your constituency, your customers, your employees, your partners. And if you're not getting the feedback that is tangibly letting you know that you're succeeding, then you need to really focus on what they're telling you you're doing wrong. And if you still can't fix it, then you need to decide, am I really solving a problem that is important to other people as I think it is to me? Is the value proposition really as real as I think it is? And should I even be doing this? Should I even be the one who's running this kind of a company at some point where you say, maybe I think I'm doing well, but everybody's, what I can see is we're not performing very well, and maybe this isn't as perfect as I thought it was going to be. So I know there's I know I hear it all the time, make mistakes, learn from your mistakes, sort of move on. But if this is your full commitment and you have a family and everything else, you got to be in it really hard. And I think the Paint Sun guy said it yesterday, one of our entrepreneurs, his thing was, one thing I knew for sure, we better have it be that we can paint, we can actually do a painting job, one job, and then we'll go to 2 jobs and 3 jobs, but one job where the person says, yes, this actually was much better than typically going to get a contractor and chasing down and getting a quote, and you painted my house well. And then if we do that, then we will move to the 2nd job and the 3rd job. But if we're not painting the job well, then we might as well just close our doors and not even try to build all the other things, the marketing and the...
Mm-hmm. Cool. Joe?
Tough assignment keeping it under a minute for me, but I think I can. If you're an entrepreneur because you want to make money, don't do it. If you're an entrepreneur because you are passionate about fixing some problem you see around you, then do it.
So actually, Ralph took my advice, which is focus. That's because most of the entrepreneurs I talk to are, oh, look, a chicken. But I will say that there's aspects of everything. What's that? Yeah. It works for Colonel Sanders. It doesn't work if you're doing a tech company. But I think the thought a lot of people have when they become entrepreneurs is, I'm going to be rich, I'm going to have all kinds of flexibility in my life, I'm going to be revered by others, and a lot of these things are just the PR around it, and I do PR, so I know that that's really not true. And I do think that if you're going into it for flexibility, understand that entrepreneurship is definitely, you have flexibility. You can work any 100 hours a week you want to. But I do think that you need to let other people do things for you, and you can't do it all yourself. So if you are looking at it and saying, well, I can do the marketing, and I can do the public relations, and I can do the operations, and I can do the finance, there are not enough hours in your day. Find the people, hire the bookkeeper, hire the PR person, hire the finance person, hire the developers, because maybe you can do it all, but these are people that are spending all of their time focused on one particular thing. Social media marketing, who's got Facebook at home? We all can do Facebook, right? Well, you're doing social media, you're not doing social media marketing. Two different things, and there are people that are focusing on those things, and that's all they do. So find the pros that you trust and get them to do what you need done.
I don't know, though, because I don't know what startup that I've ever seen that could afford to hire a finance person.
Those are always
PR
the people that
person.
come at my door. They have no money.
I mean,
some
that's
of it you
just-
can
I
do-
mean, the reality is
You have to build
you're
toward
not.
that.
That's a luxury that is going to be one of your validations of success, that you're able to start hiring those different positions. But I can tell you that it's very unusual that a startup would ever be able to spend that kind of budget. In fact, I would tell you that you're probably going to find you're the bookkeeper, you're plugging in the computer, you're doing the marketing, which I actually think is good, because you will learn and have to become almost a domain expert at those things, which will make you be a much better hirer and lead by example. But I would be careful, because
the thing I would add, though, that's in the middle of what you guys are saying is there's stuff like Upwork and 99 Designs and Catalent, like the marketplaces where you could go and say, like, hey, I want to hire somebody to validate this Excel spreadsheet, and I can pay $500 or $1,000 to somebody who might be in, Topeka, Kansas, and is going to do it.
Most of the PR firms, the big PR firms, won't let you darken their door unless you've got $10,000 to $15,000 a month. That's pretty standard. But there are freelancers, there are what we call single shingles, people that work for $400 a month, $1,000 a month. The Upwork is a great resource. There are tons of better opportunities. If you're thinking about how much you bill out an hour, if you have a business where you're an hourly consultant, if you're billing out at $200 an hour and you can buy the time of a bookkeeper at $50 an hour, that's $150 an hour of opportunity. So you just have to think about what makes sense. Believe me, I don't have all those resources either, but there are things that I know I can't do as well as somebody focused on it, and if I can get them to focus on it, I can go out with billable hours.
Liz, jump in real quick,
But
and then I want your
remember,
questions
you're
from
in
you.
a community, and I just heard about an accountant and a graphic designer and a website designer. So you have all your people right here in this room for you. Take advantage of them, talk with them, learn from them, and you'll get much further.
You could do a barter arrangement among the
Yeah, I was going to say, let's get some trade going on. Hang on one second, Meg, because I definitely want to open up for questions now. My one super tactical piece of advice that I observe all the time with entrepreneurs is someone will be having a conversation with Joe or with either of the Scotts, and they're giving some advice like, hey, you should really talk to this person, or like go to this website and check out what they're doing. And the entrepreneur is nodding and nodding. Take notes. There's a notepad app on your phone. There's paper. Like, it's amazing to me, like somebody like Ralph will be dropping these pearls of wisdom of like, oh yeah, I know Bob, he's on the board of this company, you really should connect. And the entrepreneur's nodding, and you just know they're not gonna remember the name. They're gonna wanna follow up. It's annoying to Ralph if you email him 3 days later and you're like, hey, what was all that advice you gave me in the hallway at the Dreamland? Like, write it down. All right, let's get the microphone out to the audience here, and so we can hear what you're saying. Meg, go ahead.
I just wanted to piggyback a little bit on that conversation, in that I deal in the finance world and I work on the investor side and the business owner side. And there's things in that early stage that if you frig it up, there's no coming back from it. right? Like, if you get yourself in tax trouble at the very early stages, you're not fixing that. What are the things that you guys, as you're prioritizing what you're going to pay a professional to do versus what you're going to try to do yourself, where's that priority? What are those things do not screw up out of the gate?
Yeah, it's such an interesting question. Like, do you go to LegalZoom and just fill out the contract yourself, or do you pay the $500 an hour lawyer?
So if you're doing a startup, make sure you get your cap table right from the very beginning, because that is such a pain in the tuchus to fix further on. You've got to go through lawyers and through systems, and just do it right the first time and make sure you do that correctly. If you're a small business and you haven't done it before, I think a really excellent bookkeeper to make sure that you're keeping everything in line is one of the best things you can do for yourself, seconded by a really great marketing person. Either you can have that in-house or not.
Yeah, one comment. You're going to be getting a lot of advice from us, and a lot of it's going to be contradictory. The conversation with Bobby and Scott about, go get an expert. Jesus, you can't afford an expert, do it yourself kind of thing. And I just throw out as an example, you've probably all heard the expression, the early bird gets the worm. That tells you be out there, go first. You'll have someone else tell you the second mouse gets the cheese. And you have two totally contradictory pieces of advice, and it depends, and so there are times when you absolutely should just do it yourself. But if you're working at midnight and you could be earning $200 instead of paying someone $50, then you're a fool for doing it at midnight. On the other hand, if you're dealing with an issue that you're going to regret 5 years later for doing wrong, as Liz was pointing out, then that's where you have to change your priorities. So it depends. Every piece of advice you get from us, the answer is it depends.
Let's take some more questions. Do you still have the mic out there?
Did you get your question answered? Do you feel like, okay.
Parker.
Yeah, my question was, regarding focus, time management. As a small business owner, you are wearing many hats. You might be head of HR, the head of sales, answering the phones. How do you, or what hacks do you have for managing your day and prioritizing your tasks?
People like my focus comment. My best hack is Excel. Okay, so this is just how I would do it. Every day I would come in. I would keep all these things I needed to do just in a list in Excel. And I would just have a 1 to 10 ranking on how important it was that I got it done. Because there will always be more on your list than you can do. Okay? And the discipline I got myself into is I was an early bird. I'd get in the office early. I would immediately just open it up and reprioritize because things change. And I would bubble up the things. And another thing I'd like to do is I would pick a couple of them off the list and say, I'm not going home until I get these done tonight. Because things can just linger and take time. That's how I do it.
When you say early, like what was showing up in the office early?
I used to get up at, even today I got up at like 5 something. I'm just early. So I usually would get in the office by 6. And I would get more done from 6 to 8 than the whole rest of my day. Once everyone started coming in, then get distracted.
And I don't think there's, that is extremely typical and usual in your, I call it daily course of business. What sort of separates you, or you'll decide if you want to go even further and further and build it bigger and bigger, is finding a lot about yourself that, at the end of the day, you get up. If you're the person who runs around and says, a really hard day, I can't believe this blew up, we got ourselves in tax problem, my bookkeeper ended up not doing the right thing, or I just spent a bunch of money with because I listened to somebody else and hired a marketing agency, but I could only spend $2,000 and they do one Facebook post or something and you don't get one customer, which is what's going to happen about 99% of the time in those scenarios. Then you're not the person who should be very entrepreneurial. If you find, listen, I actually thrive off it, but you got to move the ball every single day. When I did Shoe Buy, I just measured it by shoes that we sold, and we were extremely competitive group. We were in there morning, day, and night, no one complained, and we sold 1, then 2, and 3. But every day personally, I was testing and figuring out and calling up everybody and their brother on trying to do marketing deals. So I'd get like American Express to throw me in 10 million credit card statements, or Dole Foods to put me on like 20,000 point of sale displays, and you get $10 off if you buy a Dole fruit pack, and get a little discount at Chew Buy, and all these things where I was trying to build the business on sort of the backs of everybody else because you don't have the money. And we were doing we were answering customer service. We were taking customer service 24 hours a day, taking turns. And trust me, it's really fun when you have like somebody who calls you like 5 times at 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning, because I still just can't find the right shoe. And you're like, I'm really trying to get some sleep here. But that's every one of the good businesses. And the founders and the CEOs that say that they have figured out how to delegate, and they're not, I'm in the bigger picture. Those are the ones who have raised a lot of money. They're never going to really produce any really significant value. I've got an operating team of about 12 people that have collectively created about $300 billion in value. Every one of them has sold major companies, minus we have Leonardo DiCaprio. Is the outlier that we're realizing is an interesting experiment. But every one of them will tell you the exact stories. Every one of them thought we were going to fail. Every one of us was working 24 hours a day. Every one of us did our financial planning wrong. Cap table, I don't know who has time to look at a cap table. I don't agree with that necessarily. You got much bigger fish to fry than worry about your cap table at that point. I think you might have, you had that good thing of like childbirth where you forget sometimes. Like cap table, who cares about the cap table then? Yeah. But what I was saying to you guys,
What is a cap table?
Yeah. It's just how the company's capitalized, who owns it, how it's owned. How the company's capitalized, who owns it, how it's owned. If you have venture backing, it'll be part of that. Some of it's options. But, as you need to have follow-on funding and you don't have a great cap table, that's really difficult.
follow-on funding. You're like worried about paying for the rates. But I would say where I totally agree with Liz is I was extremely exploitive. In fact, even people like Scott have asked me, like, how do you have like the CEO of iRobot and the CEO of Cascade and Endeca and Communispace and all these companies that are part of our team? And I'm like, we became very friendly with them because I was calling on them constantly when I was doing my business. And I would say, in this part, I do agree with too. You gotta. Somebody was saying, everybody in this room, you gotta like relentlessly put your integrity aside or your ego aside, in the sense that you've gotta like glean anything you can from everyone. And like, I'm a sucker. I would tell you different than, I guess, the 3-day email. Joe's incredible, but I meet with entrepreneurs constantly because I can't really say no, which is why I try to hide from doing these things. But if you reached out to me, I'd grab coffee with you here. And before you left, I'd try to give you some nugget. I'd be like, call this person, or here's somebody that maybe it's helpful or not, but you got to get everything you can and learn as fast as you can.
Yeah, my point is just like, it annoys me if if you have that coffee with somebody and then they're not, 3 days later, like, what did you tell me at that coffee again? It's like, all right, that's bad time management. Let's take some more questions out here. Karen, can we get the mic over on that side?
Thank you. I always hear about these people like you all that have built and sold businesses and buy big houses on Nantucket. When did you decide to sell your companies, and why? Did you ever decide to grow or not grow? That's it. Just one or two of you, not everybody, but what motivated you to sell?
Wait, are you saying I planted that question? No, I didn't plant that question, but Ralph, you sold sort of recently. Scott, Liz, you may have some.
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a complicated question. I'll try and keep it with maybe a real example. At WordStream, we had been about 8 or 9 or 10 years old as a company at that point. When you take capital from venture capital funds, they tend to have 10-year lives to their funds. They invest their money in the first couple years. It takes time to build a company, but when you accept capital from someone, a lot of you probably bootstrapped in this room, but when you accept someone else's capital, you are going down a path where eventually they're going to want to return. Okay? So combination of investors that have been in a long time, and also market opportunity. Hey, the economy is vibrant. Companies are acquiring companies, you know, and it was those combination of things that made it the right time for that business.
And just
Yeah.
to be a Sarah Sanders press conference here, but a two-part question.
Yeah, sure.
So, how did you go about that without spooking your employees and competition or your customers?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I had hired someone, we do some succession planning, also good for every business. Who's going to take over for this business? And we hired a guy in to eventually take over for me. We said it'd be a good idea to hire him now and have a year or two overlap. And then the board, in a board meeting, we hired the guy. I'm like, oh, this is great. The next board meeting, they said, now would be a good time to test the market. Ralph, why don't you run that, you know? Because you hired this guy who can run the company now. So that worked out quite well. I ran the sales process. We hired a banker. We kind of it was a bigger company, so we did a formal process. But we limited the distraction of the business because I was doing that full time and someone was running it. And then the last point is, it's very good in a big company like that to keep the group very small that is in the know, because a lot of times it just doesn't work. Okay, I've been part of many points where maybe a company expressed interest or we decided it might be a good time. It turned out it wasn't a great time. And the disappointment you can create if everybody knows about it is immense. So avoid that at all costs. Very small in the know group, and we were able to keep it quiet in that case.
Yeah, and for us, we had started as a consulting shop, which was profitable, and my favorite type of business is a profitable one. But we saw an opportunity to add a software layer on top of what we were doing for consulting, and ended up raising money. And at that point, our burn was more than we were bringing in. So again, thinking of that sort of bloody board meeting, that we knew that we were going to cash out at a certain amount of time and either had to raise more money, get a lot smaller, or be acquired. And luckily, we had a term sheet from a great investor. But one of the things that always killed me about Dragon is I think we created a lot of value, but we did a really poor job of capturing it. So, take Ring, for example. We worked with Jamie really early on, and a lot of people helped him succeed.
Can you explain what that company was?
Oh, so Ring, the doorbell company, basically with a video on a doorbell that can let you know who's ringing your bell. And they started off as nothing and just exited to Amazon for over $1 billion, which is Jamie is a phenomenal entrepreneur, and he's also a Nantucket resident, which is kind of fun. But we'd work with them really early on, and maybe we charged them $250,000 to do a fair amount of work. And we were paid fairly, no problems with that. But looking, I think, at some of the influence we had on his ultimate outcome, is geez, I felt like we provided more value than we were able to capture. And with us, we ended up getting acquired by a large component company that sells resistors, capacitors, processors. So if we could have been engaged, if we could have been part of this company earlier, work with Jamie, maybe he would have bought some of that stuff from us, and then we could have charged Dragon, services. But there's an opportunity, kind of, for an ongoing relationship to keep selling him the parts for the doorbell. And the idea is we'd sell him, parts at a fair price, and it would have been good for him. But instead of capturing $250,000, it could have been tens or hundreds of millions. So for us, Dragon provided a little piece, but if we could join a bigger company, we could capture more of that value chain. So part of it was we were going to die if we didn't do something, and the other part is sort of strategic, that there's a way to capture more value.
And if everybody's going to win, it was kind of a no-brainer. I mean, in an ideal situation, you get bought not being sold, and we had 3 people come in to try to buy us, but the reality was, my cap table, I guess you would hate it, because we had about 52 friends and family as angels that I was very excited. Thought it was that year when I said that was the other thing. I was going to move to Africa because if we failed, because even my girlfriend's dad, Bruno, and his best friend, Rocco, which is scary as it is, were investors. But we also gave away a lot of equity. We had 200 employees, but I knew every single one of them really well, actually, and the brands. So a lot of times when you sell these things, it's like you get some guy who goes up there and he makes this big announcement. It's all scary. But not if you're very friendly with your whole group. It's just another conversation. And we do have power when these things are bought. People don't exercise it the right way. But when I sold the company, I made them put in, they couldn't move the company more than 80 miles outside of Boston. They couldn't let go of one employee. They couldn't change, I mean, they had to actually up people's. We actually got them more, and a lot of people became millionaires. And the reality too was the business was very profitable, and I knew we were on this stupid trajectory, but I was kind of like, even being genuine in the M&A process, and I'm not saying I'm so perfect, but I actually kind of like the fact that you sell, like I wouldn't sell something that shouldn't be sold, so I even knew that the acquirer was actually I knew they were going to do phenomenally well. I mean, I think the reason why they sold to Walmart was we paid for the whole acquisition in a certain number of years, so I even got to sell it. But you know what? Do you want to sell a company and then 6 months later have them find out that they way overpaid or that you're not? So if your shareholders are making money, your employees are super psyched and they're just getting even more opportunity. You're actually making a lot of money. Your acquirer is going to be happy. To me, I mean, you're just being foolish not to do it at that point because we don't control the world. And if you did go through the dot-com implosion or the economic recession, you do realize there are things out of our control. So I think you don't overplay the hand in that scenario.
Is there maybe one last quick question?
Actually, I have one, yes, since we've got a lot of small businesses here. So Scott, I remember way back, I was ready and I was going to pitch you on trying to cover my company as a story. And for an awful lot of people here, they may be getting ready to kind of take their small business to the next level and they want to get a bit of attention from the press. Do you want to talk a little bit about what's the best way to approach the press?
You know, I mean, I think we can talk about that in one of the breakout workshops that Bobby's going to run. So thanks for teeing that up. But I mean, my super succinct answers, is that authenticity and one-to-one, human-to-human conversations are really great. And I think it winds up being interesting when you have somebody with a PR background and a journalist. We probably will give you conflicting advice. But I would say, like, if an email comes from a human being that's like, hey, I have a beeswax lip balm company on Nantucket, and I did it with my daughter, and I'd love, if this is something interesting, I'm happy to send you some samples or happy to do an interview. Like, those emails are actually much more likely to get a response from a journalist versus hiring a PR firm that's gonna blast out a press release to everybody that's like, I have this business on Nantucket that I would love to introduce you to the founder. And they don't really know as much about your business as you do. And so I actually think being a human being and treating journalists as human beings, whether they're a TV or radio or print person or even a blogger or Instagram influencer, trying to meet them face to face is always really good. So being at trade shows or conferences or cocktail parties on Nantucket where you meet somebody who might be a TV reporter, radio producer, whatever, and not being in like that pitch mode, but just being authentic about here's what I think is interesting about what we're doing. We'll talk a lot more about this in the breakout, but I think, it is interesting how the dream of like hiring a PR firm to do it for you often gets you worse results than if you're just a human being reaching out or, building that personal relationship.